All right. I am excited to be back for episode number 2. Susan, we're following up with your fruit tree pruning book. And at the same time, I became aware of your grafting book that you have a co-author with, Steph Muma. Get that right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Good, good. And I've had a chance to go through that book, and I am so excited to learn more about it. I've always been very curious about grafting, but I've never done it. I've watched it done a bunch, but I've never personally done it. And I bet there are a lot of people listening right now who are in that same boat. So what we're going to do today, yep, is learn more about the grafting and hear it from two people that have been doing it quite a long time. And I think Steph gets the blue ribbon for the longest time of the group here. But let's get into it. So first of all, let me welcome you, Steph. You're new, and I'm glad you're here. So give us a little bit of background on you, just a brief intro, and then Susan, you'll get your chance to do the same.
Uh-huh. Sure, yeah. So I started out down this path kind of in my teens, late teens, and I've always had an interest in growing things and fruit trees and food, growing food in general.
Mhm.
And my cousin Ken, he founded the nursery in 2009. He started it up, and I've worked for him seasonally during school, in the off seasons and stuff. And Then it ended up being something that he decided he wanted to move on from, and I decided to take it over. So that was kind of 2018. And yeah, I've been grafting quite a bit in the summers since about 2016, since 2017 in there. And So my husband and I, we run Silver Creek Nursery. We have about 3 one-acre test orchards with well over 500 different cultivars of plants, and the nursery is the main business, but the orchard and the experimentation are a big part of what makes me excited and happy and get up in the morning.
Excellent. Well, we're going to learn a lot more about that through the course of this conversation. So thanks for that intro. Susan, we know you, but feel free to just say hello again and give us a little bit of that background too.
So, hello again. It's Susan. And Yeah, so I do fruit tree care education. And like you, Joe, for years, I'm teaching people how to prune fruit trees, how to choose fruit trees that will thrive in your unique location. That's the biggest mistake people make is they plant the wrong trees and it's a whole saga and it doesn't have to be that way. So I've been teaching people for, I don't know, almost 15 years. And like you, I kind of shied away from the grafting because I thought grafting is just for fancy people. And I just really thought, I'm never going to be able to do this. This is like a skill that you need really good. You need to be good with your hands and don't even bother trying. I did go to a million different workshops to try to learn grafting. I went with my husband. He would be out there doing the things with the knife, and I'd be shying away and saying, I just can't do this. And then I met Steph. So interestingly, so before Steph, I knew her cousin. And because I used to buy fruit trees from him, and he's such a lovely person, and he was so young and so successful with all the grafting he did. And then when he told me he was selling his nursery to Steph, who is even younger than him, crazy. And she's taking over this nursery and she's going to be doing all the grafting. I was immediately intrigued because somehow, Steph being a young woman, I'm thinking, if she can do it, can't I do it? Maybe I can do this too. And so it took a while before I had the courage to actually, and Steph, tell me if I'm wrong. Like, I think I reached out to you to say, hey, can you teach me this thing? And maybe we can make a course together about this. Do you remember, Steph, how that happened? I can't remember. I honestly can't quite remember other than I do have this distinct little memory being in the basement and getting really excited that we were like just those initial emails, and like I just have this memory of that sort of light bulb moment of like, oh, Susan makes these awesome courses and we could do one on grafting, and we have so many people asking about grafting, and I think it's a really cool, fun thing to do, and like this is just a perfect match here. And then all of a sudden from there, I think it was a year or 2 later, we had our course, and then all of a sudden there was a book out, and it just all has snowballed since then. So, yeah, it's kind of was like an instant quick connection.
Very exciting. I'm so glad that you all got together and you did the course and now you have the book. And now I get to ask you both some questions about grafting and you can give us the 101 on it and beyond because we've got an audience from all levels, including first timers and people like me who have never grafted before, as well as people who have grafted a lot. So I'm going to ask you mostly basic questions, and then I'll maybe come back in with some follow-up, but I really want everybody to have a very good overview before we go deep on it, which we can still do today, but I'm maybe hinting at even a 202 episode after this. But let's start with the basics, and I will start with, the most basic of all questions, and that is, what is grafting and why do we do that?
I'll jump in. That's kind of Susan question that I can answer for you. Grafting, and this is why I was so interested in it. Grafting is propagating fruit trees. And here where we are in our climate, we can grow cherry trees, apple trees, pear trees, apricot trees. And yet all of those trees are kind of like Franken-trees. It's not like you eat an apple and you take the seed and you plant the seed in the ground and then you get a Macintosh apple or a Honeycrisp apple. It just doesn't really work like that. Fruit trees are made out of two pieces. They're Franken-trees. So the top part is the fruiting wood, and that determines what type of fruit that tree will produce. So it's literally a clipping off of a tree that produces that kind of fruit. The bottom part is a compatible rootstock. It's a totally different tree. And the grafter is like this magician who takes the bottom part, who takes the roots of some other tree and puts it together with the top part. So grafting is done, the kind of grafting that Steph taught me to do, that we've been doing. You use a sharp knife, you're making certain cuts. They're very simple in some ways. And you wrap it carefully, you do it at the right time of year, and then you cross your fingers and wait. And over time, those two, if you're successful, if your cut is good, if you've matched up the two trees properly, you will magically have one tree. It turns into one tree that produces the exact kind of fruit that you want to grow. And just to throw in there, that rootstock isn't just there to help us because, your cutting from the tree doesn't automatically have roots. The rootstock gives us so many benefits: disease resistance sometimes, earlier, later flowering times. It gives us so much. And so we carefully choose a rootstock to go with the top part of the tree, the fruiting wood, to have our perfectly customized tree. And I'll throw in one other piece. If you know how to graft, and let's say you, Joe, have a backyard apple tree that has Honeycrisp apples, and you think, hey, I'd love to have Golden Delicious apples on there, and I'd really like to have some pristine apples and some cane apples. You can take those very same skills that you learned to graft, a fruit tree from scratch, and you can graft on branches so that you have a multi-apple tree now in your backyard that produces loads of different types of apples. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but I have a follow-up question, and we're already jumping ahead, as I'm not surprised that we're doing, but that's how we roll. And so if we're grafting a new variety of apple onto an existing apple tree that we grafted before, when we add the new variety on, we're grafting it to a branch, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
that's not
And
root,
I'll
or it's
actually,
serving as a rootstock.
it is. That's right. I like to call it the host tree. It's
Okay.
the host tree, right? And so you can graft it onto a branch, but I want to ask Steph because I know that there are entire orchards. Let's say you have an orchard, Joe, you've started an orchard and you're planting Macintosh apples, and Macintosh apples are no longer in. People are not buying Macintosh apples.
Mm.
I know of a story, and perhaps Steph told me this story, or maybe it was someone else, that of a farmer who cut down all the trees, leaving a stump, and then regrafted them with some other variety that's popular now. So all of those trunks were host trees. Am I right, Steph? Was that your story?
Quite possibly. Yeah, yeah. It's definitely that's definitely a thing. Sometimes you'll see, yeah, let's just say entire top of the orchard is all just chopped off. That's typically done in dormancy, and then in spring you come back in and it's called top working, where you will usually do like a bark graft, bark inlay around the edges of the trees, or you could collect, but I like bark personally for that kind of a more intensive thing. Yeah, yeah, it's kinda crazy what you can do with grafting and the options you have, and even the compatibility between different things, a lot of most species are like you stick within them. So like apple goes on apple and pear goes on pear, but there are some that have variations and there's options yet to be discovered too. For example, your prunus species often has a lot of cross compatibility. So your like your plums and apricots can kind of mix and match on one tree, things like that. So yeah, grafting, it's pretty wild what you can do with it.
Okay, Steph, I have another question for you because Susan mentioned these Franken-trees, and that's one of the reasons why we graft is that we just took if we took a seed from an apple and just planted it, we're not going to get, a pristine apple tree of that same variety. Correct so far?
Yep. Uh-huh.
So why is that? And just explain that, and then we'll get into more of the nuances of why we're picking certain rootstock.
For sure. Yeah. So the easiest way I like to look at it or explain it to people is it's the same kind of concept as with humans. You need the two, a mother and a father. Your child is going to be that genetic mix up of the two. So most fruit trees, most apples especially, are dioecious. And so they have the two different pollen sources. So that's going to be the mix up of the genetics of the seed that you plant from the apple. So grafting, you get that specific genetic piece that keeps it exactly what it was. So that's clonally propagating. So that's what grafting is a form of. So yeah, that's where that comes into play.
Okay. So back to the rootstock. So we're now talking about really the two pieces that you basically need in order to graft. You need the rootstock, which is called rootstock, and then the top part, which produces the growth and the fruit, is the scion, correct?
Yep, Scion wood. In the summer, it's called budwood, but it's exactly the same part of the tree and propagate. Like it's the same thing. It's just sometimes called different.
Okay. And so if I'm shopping for a fruit tree, let's say I'm shopping for an apple tree online,
Mm.
um, and I want a type of apple. Let's say I want a Macintosh, but I don't want one that's going to grow 25 feet tall. I don't, I have a small backyard, let's say. Can I get a Macintosh that only grows to 10 feet in
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
yeah, it's because of the roots,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's right. So the rootstock, it controls the size. It also contributes to the age of the tree. So the smaller, the more compact the tree, the shorter the lifespan it's going to have. And it would also need to be staked permanently because the roots don't anchor into the ground the same as a full size or own root tree. So that's why a high density orchard you might see commercially, it'll all be staked and trellis, and each tree will be supported. Whereas the semi-dwarf tree, you're looking at, sorry, I should jump back to with the dwarf trees, that's the smaller size. You're going to have 2 to 4 years for fruit production. You're going to have it timing out at around 20 years, and every variety and combination is a little bit different. So take that with a grain of salt. And it needs to be permanently staked, and it tops out at about that 8 foot height, 10 feet around in there. Semi dwarf is kind of like your medium sized tree, and that one's going to be around 5 years. Again, there's a
Before we
huge
get fruit.
margin here before you get fruit. Yep. It's going to be 12 to 15 feet tall, thereabouts, and it typically will live 50, sometimes more than that, years long of good productivity. And then your full size is that much bigger in range, 25 feet plus in height, can be 10 years before you get fruit, live for 100 years plus. Again, all lots of variation within those ranges, but that's
Mhm.
kind of a sort of a brief overview of what you're kind of aiming for with your different rootstock options.
Okay, so far so good. Very interesting, and thanks for all of that explanation. So we know the parts in the grafting process as far as the living material goes. We'll talk about tools in just a minute. But if we want to do our own grafting, and I know I'm jumping ahead again, but do we order, if we're doing our own grafting, where do we get the living parts? Where do we get the rootstock? Where do we get the scion wood?
Yeah, I'll go ahead with this one. So the rootstock you typically will have to buy in from another nursery. So we have rootstock beds at my dad's place, but there's other nurseries. There's lots of nurseries that sell rootstock, more specialty. But you can, if you're really frugal or experimental, you could take a seed from an apple and plant that. But you lose a lot of the benefits of the rootstock. It's really, I wouldn't recommend doing that because you don't have that guarantee that you do with clonally propagated rootstock, where you've got those disease resistancies, you've got the dwarfing you want, you've got the soil tolerance and all those different characteristics. That's the whole point of the process. So that's why I would typically say your rootstock you're going to purchase from another nursery.
Yep.
And the top part of the tree, your scion wood or budwood, depending what time of year you're grafting, but for most people, scion wood, that's the dormant one in spring that you'd be grafting. That you'd also likely purchased from a nursery, but there's also different like Scion exchanges online and different
Hmm.
sources that way. But you do have to be a little bit careful because pedigree can, you know, your neighbor down the road has a tree they think is a wealthy apple. It turns out it's not actually. That happens all the time. So knowing that you're getting quality material from quality trusted sources is very important because there's a lot of discrepancies.
And so, I could probably most companies, most nurseries, maybe yours too, that sells the rootstock sells the Scion wood too. I could get both from the same place, right?
Usually, yeah.
And so am I saving money? Why would I do that if you offer, a fully grafted tree of what I'm looking for? Am I smarter to go ahead and let you send me the whole tree? Or why would I am I doing it to save money or because I love grafting? Why would I order them separately and do it myself if somebody offers it together?
Well, both, and it depends on what your values are. The benefits of doing it yourself, grafting yourself, is definitely a lot cheaper for sure,
Okay.
hands down. That being said, you're also, if time is of the essence, you're having to do the work that's done in the nursery of 2 growing seasons,
Mhm.
typically, sometimes even longer, that you are missing out on, that you're paying for when you buy a
Yeah.
grafted apple tree. So those are kind of your
Trade-offs.
different.
Okay. All right, Susan, back to you. So, what was the first thing that you grafted, and what have you grafted since? My question really probably in the broader sense is, what all can be grafted?
I think so for me, working with Steph, oh my gosh. At first I was just watching her doing the grafting in our park. For instance, we did some filming for our online course in my orchard park that I work in or volunteer in. And so I'm doing the motions and learning how to cut the wood and doing everything. But in the end, we were filming Steph doing the grafting. So then I started to go out and do it myself. And I went to a Spadina house orchard, a historic orchard here in Toronto. And I'm like, okay, I can do this myself. It was my first time without Steph by my side. I can do this. I can do this. I went with my friend. I went a couple of times and I did it. And each time I had a friend with me, it's like, just be here, some moral support. Anyways, so both times in the early years, it was apple trees because I find that they're very forgiving and they almost want to be grafted. They just seem to want to take. And each time it was like a heirloom tree. One was an heirloom tree that was sort of hidden away in the back of the orchard, and they kind of it broke off at some point. So I grafted a branch on there. I actually grafted, I think, 4 or 5, and one resulted in
Mhm.
a successful graft.
This is
And
apples?
this was
Yep.
apples. And then last year or 2 years ago, now I'm getting confused. Maybe it was last year. Yeah, last year I did again apple trees, but in the front of the orchard. And my success rate went way up. Half of my grafts worked, and I must have done, I guess, 6 maybe or 8. And then this year, I have yet to see. This year, for the first time, I grafted not onto a mature tree, but onto a young rootstock. And that was very different.
Mm.
And I was super nervous, but I did it. And out of the 3 grafts that I've done, I think 2 have a good chance of being successful. One, I think I'm going to have to wait for late summer for the second window and I will try again. But who knows? You never know. It may take.
Steph, is the general consensus on somebody that's new to grafting, are they typically starting off with rootstock versus grafting into a branch of a tree?
Well, I would say that can vary wildly
Mm.
depending on, like, in terms of what customers are coming to us with and different projects they have.
Yeah.
I guess maybe it starts off with rootstock maybe for our clientele
Mm.
over an existing tree, but lots of people have existing trees, a favorite old one that
Okay.
was on grandpa's farm and whatever they wanna save it, and they typically maybe are grafting onto rootstocks, but it's a totally interchangeable skill and worth having, I think, for anybody interested in growing fruit. You may as well know how to graft because it goes hand in hand and it's so useful.
So back to your timeline on the, dwarf, semi-dwarf, and full-size trees, and you gave and kinda how long they live based on the size that they are at maturity. If someone came upon an apple tree that's in decline and rapidly so, but they wanna but they wanna take new scion wood and graft it to that tree in decline, the chances are still good that because the rootstock probably is still good, that it's gonna take? I mean, what if the top growth is in decline, That's not a direct correlation to what's going on with the rootstock, is it?
That is a great question because it really does depend. So, what I've learned over time is that these old trees, if the roots of the trees are solid, like sometimes these trees can live for a long time. Like Steph said, a full size tree can live for 100 years. And it could be that it's not diseased. It's just maybe you don't like the cultivar very much. You can save it, but if the tree is sick, if it's not a well tree, if it's oozing with goop, if it's got all sorts of cankers everywhere, which are different lesions that indicate disease, don't graft onto that one. So if you think it's a strong, tough tree, sometimes you can see certain diseases, like for instance, fire blight. On a big old tree, fire blight is a nasty disease and it starts with the tips of the branches.
Hmm?
So you may be cutting off those tips of the branches and you may think, you know what, this tree is suffering from fire blight. What if I cut back enough to the tree where it's not experiencing the fire blight, go back to the old wood and graft on some branches that are of a fire blight resistant apple cultivar?
Wow.
Oh, at that point, you've got a mature tree with strong roots, and you've got a good chance of now having not to fight the fire blight. So there's ways. Am I right, Steph? I mean, that's what my thinking would be.
Yeah, and I would add to that, it would depend a little bit. Like, for example, if you knew that the tree that you wanted to graft onto was on semi-dwarf roots, so that's sort of the medium size,
Mhm.
medium, if you will, and you were going to like top work it drastically, and you knew that tree was 45 years old, I would probably say don't bother
Yeah.
because you know your roots, the root system is kind of on its way out anyways. And there's really, even if it does look healthy and seem sound, you don't, your efforts, you might get 5 years or something or 10 years if you're lucky, but then things kind of time out. And so it depends on, again, all the different variables that you're working with for sure. But I think there's like, I would probably not graft. Yeah. It depends too if you're just grafting a branch versus if you are doing something drastic like top working, that kind of is a different path as well. If you're going to top work a tree, always consider that's a pretty intensive thing for the tree to then regrow that. That's a huge surgery and a huge recovery and a huge stress on the tree. Versus if you're just hacking a branch off and regrowing a simple branch on the tree, that's a lot less stressful to the tree. So an older tree, the bounce back. Just thinking of all the different timelines in your head of what you're doing and what you're wanting to accomplish and trying to balance all that is, yeah.
All the heirloom apple trees that are out there, and I know we keep talking about apples, but why switch now? All those heirloom apple orchards that are all over the country, were those all originally grafted, or was there ever a point where those were the originals from seed?
Yeah, so basically, people have been grafting fruit trees since ancient Roman times.
Oh.
You know what I mean? There's the story of Johnny Appleseed, and he was a guy who planted a whole bunch of seeds to grow apple trees, but he wasn't eating those as fresh, yummy, delicious, crunchy, sweet apples. He was growing these trees to be cider apples, to produce cider apples, because in those days, that's what people drank. So even the heirloom, these old beautiful orchards, they would be grafted trees as well. Yeah, and people figured out how to do that a long time ago because people want stuff that tastes good right off the
Mhm.
tree.
And the consistency of it from the fact that it's
Yes.
grafted, yeah.
Actually, interesting point in my research, I found out there was in Roman times, with regards to rootstocks, they didn't clonally propagate rootstocks in the sort of scientific ways that we do today, but they discovered there were certain types of apples that that they could grow from seed that tended to be smaller. The whole family of apples, when you grew these trees from seed, they would not be huge, huge trees. So the Romans were like, yeah, here's some snow apple seeds, grow those out, graft onto those. So yeah, they were very advanced, more than we would think.
But just to reiterate a question or a topic that came up earlier and related to what you just said, if I'm on vacation, I find this beautiful orchard and these amazing apple trees, and there's an apple on the ground, and I'm gonna take it home and take the seeds and plant them out, I'm not gonna get that same apple tree.
You're not going to get that same apple tree. And I'm not saying it's a waste of time. there are people that are very excited about doing it, but the chances of getting a really tasty, crispy, yummy apple that you want are not super high because there's great biodiversity when it comes to apple trees and seeds. So you could plant 100 seeds, get 100 trees, and some of them are kind of hard and not really tasty, and some are kind of bitter. Maybe one or two would be tasty. If you have a small backyard and you think, I only have room for one tree, I think I'm going to hedge my bets and get a grafted tree.
Mhm.
Now, Steph does something interesting with some types of fruit, like peaches. They actually kind of grow true to seed, like they're not exactly the same. So recently, we purchased for our orchard from Steph a seedling peach tree that is not grafted. Am I right, Steph? That's what I think I bought from you.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah, and we've planted several seedling peaches in our test orchards and been very pleasantly surprised. They vary a little bit, and I mean, we don't in our test orchards, we are fairly neglectful. We are organic to the core, but at the same time, we don't always we're not super diligent with thinning fruit, for example, and pruning and stuff like that because the nursery is the main priority for us. But the one really neat thing we found, most of the seedling peaches, they tend to ripen in early September, sort of a bit later than the normal August peach season. So yeah, it's really interesting. There'll be different traits that shift. But even worth mentioning with grafting, something I've been intrigued by over the years is sort of the epigenetic markers too, that like the cider apples are a classic example. We're still talking about grafted, clonally propagated, genetically identical material, but grown in England versus grown in North America, the juice quality can vary quite a bit. There just is different little nuances, and the rootstock can make very subtle little changes and different things like that. So it's quite amazing how nature just wants diversity, wants to grow and wants to live, and it wants diversity, and it's going to make that happen no matter what it seems.
I was just going to jump in and say the interesting thing about seedling peach trees is I went to Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's home, and they've got fantastic sort of history there. But they have a peach orchard that is planted as it would have been during Thomas Jefferson's time. And those trees, or the original peach trees during Thomas Jefferson's time, were seedling peaches. They were also seedling, but there was an interesting reason for that. And that's because, get this, like peaches are my favorite fruit, but they used to feed the peaches to the cattle or to the, well, I don't know, to the animals. Like it wasn't for human food.
Huh.
Isn't that amazing? Like the best tasting fruit. And it's like they didn't really care. They were more all about apples. So that was just, yeah, I was so surprised.
Interesting story. And a question back to apples for a second, and then we'll switch topics, and I like that we went to peaches, but I have to go back to one thing I wanted to ask you both, and that is or maybe Steph, I think I was on with you when we were talking about this part. If I'm not on that vacation and I find that amazing apple, it's on the ground, and I know truly that it's not gonna come true from a seed if I try to take it home and plant it, but what if I took basically the essence of a cutting via the Scion wood, and I was close to home where wasn't in my suitcase for a month before I got it onto the rootstock? Is that would that be doable? And if so, tell me about the timing. I mean, let's say I'm on vacation in the summertime and it's fully in leaf. Is that even an appropriate time to do that?
Yeah, yeah. So that would be the way to do it if you wanted to maintain your exact
Yeah.
cultivar. If it was in summertime, you would have to make sure that your window was correct in terms of your location and kind of what's happening with the sap in the tree for grafting to happen. So and timing is in the summer timing is a lot more sensitive. So then we're talking about budwood. It's again that's terminal growth that
Yep.
the current, the most recent growth shoot of the tree. So it's still the same piece of material you're grafting with. But in the summer, your window, I've had people experienced, but tell me 5+ days is okay in transit. I'm not so keen on that at all myself. I err on the sooner the better. If you can do a graft within 24 hours, that's golden. So you want to cut your actively growing material and graft with it as soon as possible. Whereas Scion wood that's dormant, your window is much longer. So we'll sometimes harvest in January and we'll be grafting in May sometimes, and it has to be stored appropriately, but you can totally do that. So when you're going on vacation would matter, and what time of year, and all the factors.
Yeah. So if
And
we've
the
got,
grafting actually goes into that in the course. We talk about that and bark slippage and all that good stuff.
so if that's me and I'm on vacation, it'd be a good idea to bring an extra cooler, one for the beer and one for the Scion wood, right?
Yeah. Well, as long as it doesn't have fruit in it. So it could go in your little beer cooler. That'd be no problem.
I don't have a little beer cooler. Just kidding. All right. So on the timing question, let's talk about that because I specifically wanted to address it. We want to graft and we're learning how to do it. And certainly one of the most important parts is getting the timing right. So I'm sure it's not a year-round thing, just like propagation, taking cuttings from, hydrangeas. There's a right time and a not so right time to do that. What about with the grafting? What are the ideal times and the not so ideal times?
Absolutely. It is so seasonal and it's quite beautiful because of that. So, both in our course and in our book, we go through it season by season. So, the dormant season, the winter, or when the tree is totally dormant, there's no leaves, there's no flowers, no fruit. That's the ideal time to take your cuttings. So, you're going out, let's say you've got neighboring trees and you want to take cuttings from those trees, or you've got an orchard. And I know in our orchard, I take cuttings in the winter. So you can take cuttings from your trees during that dormant season, and then you need to store them really carefully. So you want to, what I do is I bring my cuttings home and I actually dip the tips in hot wax to
Mm,
seal them up to help because we want to keep the moisture in. We
yeah.
want to keep them dormant. What we don't want to do is put them somewhere warm where the branches will die. So we wrap them up carefully, put a little bit of moisture with the cuttings, and then we put them in a fridge or in a cold space where there's no fresh fruit. So a beer fridge is great because there's no fresh fruit. The problem is if you store your cuttings somewhere where there is fresh fruit, there's ethylene gas that is exuded, and that can make your cuttings come out of dormancy and die. So that's winter. Then spring comes, and everybody who grafts gets all excited. You're waiting for just the moment when it's the right time to graft. So, how do you know when it's time? You go out and you test to see if the bark is slipping on the trees that you want to graft. So, this is such an amazing concept. You think about sort of maple syrup, right? There's that perfect time when the sap is flowing and you want to get the maple syrup out of the maple trees. It's the same thing with any deciduous fruit tree. There's a certain time of year when the sap is flowing and things are moving through the cambium layer, and that's that living layer of tissue just under the bark. So when the sap is flowing and when that time is just perfect, if you make a cut in a branch, you'll find that you can easily, with your sharp knife, pull away the flaps of the wood.
Mm,
It separates from the liquidy or somewhat more liquidy layer underneath, the living tissue underneath. As soon as you see that, you're like, oh my gosh, that it's time. It's time. I can graft now because I will be able to make cuts and match that cambium layer with my Scion wood that I've got in the fridge or wherever it is with the cambium layer of the host tree, whether it's a rootstock or a tree outside.
okay.
If that time has not arrived, you're going to be hacking away at the bark to try and expose that living tissue underneath, and you'll just make wounds in the bark and nothing is going to connect.
Mm,
Think of the cambium layer, that living tissue under the bark, as glue.
mm,
That's the glue that sticks the parts together.
huh,
If you wait too long, Joe, you miss your chance.
mm,
So that's why grafting season is so fun because it's so timely. You're like, okay, is it time? Is it time? And the other cool thing about it is you can't procrastinate because if if you wait too long, you miss that window. If you do miss that window, there's another window. Okay. So the cambium layer starts to, once that season, that early spring season is ready to pass, the tree is putting its energy in other parts of the tree, not in the cambium layer. And so it won't slip. The bark won't slip. But it happens again at the end of the summer.
mm,
The bark starts to, and Steph will correct me, but the cambium layer starts to become active again in the late summer. At that point, you're not going to be taking dormant branches that Scion would. Instead, get this, Joe, you're going to be slicing a tiny little bud off a tree. It can be one tree to the next. It can be two trees, one beside the other. You can slice that living bud, one single bud, off one tree, and then you put it onto the other with like a similar matching cut. And then you wrap them up with this wonderful grafting tape that isn't expensive,
Hmm.
that seals it. It keeps the air out. It keeps the moisture in. And the difference between the two grafting seasons is in the spring grafting, you get to see your results right away. Within 3 weeks, you'll know if that graft took or not. If you do the summer grafting, oh my gosh, you may have to wait until the following growing season to know, did it even work? But it's amazing to know that one little bud has everything it needs to produce an entire tree.
Mm.
If you graft that bud onto a rootstock, one tiny single bud can make a whole tree. Pretty amazing.
So is this a dormant leaf bud or a tip bud? It's a dormant leaf bud.
It's actually, because it's late summer, it's not even dormant. It's not dormant,
Right.
but it's ripe. So you're taking a bud, you actually find a branch, like you find a branch that has leaves on it, and you pull back the leaves
Yep.
to look to see, is this bud ripe? The color will show you, will indicate if it's ripe. And so it's gonna be more brown than green, and you're like, "Whoa, this guy's ready to go." So you pull off, you can cut off the leaf part, leaving a little bit of the leaf stem, because that's what you're gonna handle. It's your leaf
Uh-huh.
stem is now a handle for the
Yeah.
bud,
Yeah.
and then you carefully, with your beautiful budding or grafting knife, you're slicing off that bud in a certain way, and then you carry it with the little leaf handle
Mhm.
there,
I get it.
and you take it to your next tree.
Huh.
Pretty amazing. I mean, it's just crazy.
Does that have a name, that technique?
Budding.
Budding.
That is budding. So there's different types. There's chip budding, there's tea budding, but it's all the same concept.
Okay. Steph, anything you want to add to that?
No, that's pretty much it. I would the one thing that came to mind as Susan was talking, I think last podcast you had a
Yep.
phenologist on.
Yeah.
And so again, this is all about sort of that seasonal timing and cues in this in terms of it's going to be depending where you are globally or whatever and what's going on, but you're going to just be following the natural cycles of the season and yeah, when things are ripe, everything's going and the cells are active and the time and then yeah, it's just this beautiful flow. And the two windows, like Susan said, that's exactly it. So you either do it in summer or sorry, in spring. And that's kind of I prefer spring grafting, especially for beginners, just because there's less things that can go wrong. It's
Yeah.
easier in
Mhm.
summer because everything's actively growing. There's a lot more room for error and failure.
Mhm.
So if you're starting out, error on doing the spring grafting, but the summer budding is another totally viable option. And stone fruits kind of tend to prefer that. So there's lots of different reasons why you might choose one over the other based on your situation, but there are lots of different times and ways to graft.
As far as the size of the Scion wood to the rootstock, I think many of us have seen examples of people grafting, and a lot of times the Scion wood kind of matches up in diameter to the rootstock. So it almost looks like a continuation of the root or the base stem. But that's not a requirement, right? I mean, do you shoot for that as an ideal scenario, or does it really matter?
Yeah, definitely that's the ideal scenario, but in reality, that's not what always happens.
Mhm.
So there's a number of different types of grafting or
Right.
modifications you can make to deal with if you have, smaller than ideal material. And so then there's things like Z grafting or doing a bark inlay graft instead. There's lots of different I can show out, there's lots of
Yeah.
different ways, but what it really boils down to is you need to make sure that your cuts are always as flat and flush as possible, matching up perfectly, and that it's the cambiums you're matching. Cambium to cambium contact. because that green outer layer, like that's where the magic happens. And
Yeah.
so if you're grafting a really skinny Scion wood onto a thick, chunky rootstock, and you do your whip tongue for a whip and tongue graft, forgot the name for it there.
It's like a
Um,
puzzle graft. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
if you're doing that and you're finding your sizes really don't match, then that just you'll want to try a slightly different grafting method. There's lots out there, but just know that you always want to have your cambiums matching as much as humanly possible.
Okay. I'm listening to this and I'm just thinking, I so want to do this. Is this like a potential addictive problem that I need to be worried about? Because I can see it happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely,
It really is.
definitely.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
And
You
once
get
you
that first taste of success and, how do you stop yourself?
And even if you don't
Yeah. You
have
want to get it
success, you
right.
just like, I know I
I know I
can
can
do
do
this.
it.
And also it's just like once you understand the science, and that's what helped for me. If you understand the science, it's intuitive.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You know that when you cut a branch and you see that there's the sort of woody part in the middle, there's the bark on the outside, and just under the bark, you can see a bright green circle.
Yeah.
You know that that's where things have to match.
Yes.
So whatever type of grafting you're doing, you think, okay, wherever I put this branch, even if it only matches on one side and not both sides, because let's say my Scion is a little skinnier than
Mhm.
my rootstock, just make sure it matches on one side then.
Yeah.
But if you center this little tiny piece of branch in the middle, because it looks pretty, right? Like it's just centered right in the middle of wherever I made my cut, there's no contact
Mhm.
between the cambium wood. So once you understand that this is science, it makes sense. It's intuitive. You can make your own cuts. You can make things up as you go along, as long as you know that you need to match cambium to cambium.
Okay, so follow up on that. So we've matched the cambium to cambium, but our scion wood is, let's just call it very thin or skinny compared to the rootstock. So the entire scion wood maybe only goes halfway into the total diameter of the rootstock. What ultimately is binding that scion wood to the rootstock so it's strong? Is it
The
fused
cambium.
together? Is the cambium itself
The
is building
cambium is
binding?
the only thing that's going to do that work. Once you match things up, you do wrap it with grafting tape is my favorite, and I've tried different things. You do wrap it carefully, but that wrapping isn't going to make it happen. That's not the trick. The magic is in the cambium. So if those cambiums don't touch, nothing's going to happen unless it's like immaculate conception, right? Like it seriously,
Yeah.
that's the trick. That green tissue, the right time of year, the tissue, that cambium is flowing, it's actively dividing, and you're matching it up and you're tricking these two trees into being able to be one.
Wow. So the strength of the cambium wood attached to the rootstock is truly at the point where the cambiums are connected.
Yeah.
Cambium layer.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. This is
And
so cool. Yeah.
if I can just jump in there too, I've been talking about it being an addictive pastime. I've started tinkering around with pawpaws and walnuts now this year and different things. And again, knowing that puzzle piece and understanding the seasonal flows for each species and the cambium contact and like just having that awareness of that's what you need, then you can really start branching out into all different areas and all different things. And for the longest time, quad grafting escaped me, and I tried different summer budding techniques and different I don't know a variety of different things for a couple of years, never had success, and then all of a sudden I did. And you'll also be surprised, or at least I was very surprised. You'll read online and resource books on how to do it, and oftentimes, I kind of sometimes when I'm doing these experimental things purposely like to go into it blind, because then you can find ways that work despite what the literature says, because
Mhm.
not everybody has tried every last thing,
Yeah.
especially pawpaws in my situation. I mean, I had grafted them. I had some in February that I grafted and they took just because our spring was mild. And there's a lot of factors at play. But again, at the same time, it does boil down to that that perfect cambium contact, the time of year being right, well wrapped, and time to heal and callus, and then all of a sudden you have a valid graft. And yeah, it's a lot of fun to see what you can create.
And Joe, by the way, if you ever wanted to be a superhero, I'm not sure if that was ever one of your things, right? Once you know how to graft,
Yeah.
everybody is going to look at you and think you are the coolest thing ever. Because seriously, so one of the volunteers in our orchard, she said, Susan, I've got this multi peach tree, this multi plum tree, and we like the red plums, but it's mostly yellow plums. Can you come over and see what you can do? So I bring my trusty knife and my
Yep.
grafting tape, and I go over and I make sure it's the right time of year. Now, don't know if it's taken yet, but she thought I was so cool because I
Yeah.
knew exactly what to do.
Yeah.
I could even teach her son how to do it. But talk about superhero.
Hmm.
When I last saw Steph, we went into her orchard and she showed me a bridge graft. So a bridge graft is when, let's say, bunnies nibble on the trunk of your tree. And you know that if it's girdled completely all the way around, the tree is just going to die.
Hmm.
But let's say you get there early enough, they've girdled the tree on the top is still alive, the tree on the bottom is still alive. You can take a branch, graft it onto the bottom, from the bottom to the top. It's like a straw. It allows all the nutrition to come from the roots
Yes.
and go up into the top of the tree. So Steph did a beautiful demo of how you can use grafting to save people's trees. It is just absolutely a magical power.
This is crazy because now this is a second time, Susan, that I'm thinking, why didn't we have this conversation earlier? If you remember in the previous episode, I just pruned my fruit trees days before, maybe 2 days before we had our conversation, which was the dumbest thing ever. But as it turns out, I think I did a pretty right job. But here, I've got deer buck that rut the cambium off my 4-inch caliper and smaller trees to the point that some I lose because it's that severe. So maybe that bridge graft would have saved the day. Where were you when I needed you?
That's Steph. That's on Steph.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pardon. You get a pass because I just met you. Very interesting. So we're talking about techniques, and I know Susan, you even said there's many. So maybe that's beyond the scope of this conversation, but maybe I will ask you this. When do you maybe you have a favorite technique that you are most comfortable with or you found the most success with? When do you change up the techniques and why?
If you're asking me that, my favorite is bark grafting. Okay, so that's with a slightly older branch, a thicker branch, maybe it's up to 2 inches thick on an existing tree. Because with one little cut of my knife, I can check that the bark is slipping. I can pull back those flaps and make the perfect little envelope where I'm going to put my Scion. My other favorite cut is what Steph taught me and which we teach in our course and in our book, which I call the frozen elbow cut. When you're actually cutting your Scion wood, Steph mentioned how important it is to have a smooth cut, not shaggy, smooth, long, flat cut. And you do that by pulling your elbows apart and you're moving from your shoulder. Yes,
Um,
exactly as
um,
you're demonstrating. You're moving from your shoulders and you're sort of jutting your other elbows out. So you've got your Scion wood, you've got your knife pull, right?
uh,
And then you get this sharp, this beautiful cut, safe. It's safe. We all talk a lot about safety. So those two things together, if you do the frozen elbow cut together with bark grafting,
Great name.
you can do anything.
Uh-huh.
Now, I couldn't do that when I was working on my rootstocks because those rootstocks are little tiny little things. And it's more like what you were describing, Joe, when they were matching up.
Yeah.
So that's when you have to do something different, like a whip and tongue graft, which is a
Yes.
little bit like a jigsaw
Yes.
puzzle or a cleft graft. So I think with my recent experiment, the 3 in my backyard, 1 is cleft and 2 are whip and tongue. And so it's good. It pushed me outside my comfort zone because I'm good at bark grafting now. I'm confident. And now it's time for me to get more and more practice doing the other ones as well.
Okay. How do we know if the graft takes and when do we know?
Steph, you want to answer that one?
Sure. Yeah. So you'll know as soon as about 2 weeks. That being said, after 2 weeks, your graft will be very, very tender. So if you are inclined to unwrap it and check it, you can so easily break it just by doing that, that I do not recommend it. But if you're like insanely keen, you can technically do that. Much better to just let the graft come into like grow. If if it's a spring graft that's dormant, let it grow, let it shoot out and grow, and you'll know, of course. In the summertime when you're grafting, you can still, and I guess I should clarify that. 2 weeks of like 20 degrees Celsius. I'm not sure what that is in Fahrenheit. But 2 weeks of warm weather because you need that callousing to heal. So I'm not talking 2 weeks in early March when it's 10 degrees Celsius out or something like that. I'm talking nice warm,
Mhm.
warm weather.
T-shirt weather?
Pardon?
T-shirt weather?
Yeah, yeah. T-shirt or short. Yeah, exactly. T-shirt, shorts. So in the summer, again, you can wait and then you can gently look at your bud. If you did budding, you can very, very carefully take your wrapping off. And what you'll see is it will kind of look like a caulking, like a puffy, light, whitish tissue, and it will be around your chip bud if you did a chip bud or grafting or
Uh-huh.
your tea bud, whatever. It will kind of seal the outline of your graft or your graft union. If you did this in spring, same thing, you'll get kind of like that white, puffy, looks like caulking, and that's the callus tissue healing and doing its thing. And when it's pale, like that's when it's really tender. So you ideally leave it longer. If you
Yeah.
do get overexcited, then,
Yeah.
so be it. But the longer it gets, the harder it gets. So waiting months to half a summer, like half a season is great. If you've used a material like electrical tape, something like that, there's different things you can use to wrap. Everything's got its pros and cons. One thing, if you're using a material like electrical tape, you can girdle your tree
Yeah.
if you don't remove it in time. So things like that are good to be a little bit mindful of, especially when your tree is, so tender and
Yeah.
young and you put all that hard work into it.
Well, I planned ahead a long time ago. I don't know what prompted me to do it, but I bought a roll of grafting tape, not
Nice.
not knowing anything yet about grafting, and that was a few years ago, but I know exactly where my grafting tape is because I
Nice.
pulled it out the other day. So I'm ready for that part, but let's talk about the other tools. So we know grafting tape and for the reasons why it's my interpretation is it's more flexible, more forgiving, it's easier on the plant, and as the plant or the scion wood or whatever is expanding, the tape is giving with it. Yeah?
Yep, it's also it depends what kind you get. Be mindful. There's different ones on the market, but if you get a good quality, like a proper
Mhm.
professional quality, it'll be biodegradable, which is great because you don't
Oh,
want plastic out
yes.
in your field.
Right.
And of course, you want it to kind of flake off, and as the diameter grows, you want that to happen
Mhm.
naturally. But it should be able to be very stretchy, maintain the moisture inside. And yeah, kind of the goals with it.
Okay, tools. Well, another favorite topic of mine. Let's talk about the tools that we need for grafting. I heard about the sharp, grafting knife. Let's talk
Mhm,
about that.
for sure.
Is it
Uh,
it's not just any knife, is it? Is it like a grafting knife? There's a such a thing
yeah.
as a grafting knife, right?
Yeah, for sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Which basically it just needs to have a single bevel, and that being said, if you picture your kitchen knives, they'll have if you look at the very tip of them,
Yeah.
it'll be a point like
Yeah.
so,
Yes, yes,
whereas a single
yes. You're
bevel
sharpening it, you're doing both sides,
both sides,
basically. Yeah.
exactly. Yep. Yep, you got it. So the grafting knife has a single bevel. The concept of that is so that when you're doing your cuts, you get that perfectly flat edge to it.
Mhm.
Uh, and it helps bite into the wood a lot nicer.
Yeah.
And it'll feel a fair bit different if you try and just use a jackknife versus using a proper grafting knife. Some people use like box cutter blades and stuff like that. I like a proper grafting knife because it's firm. It's just what I'm more comfortable with. And
Yeah.
but I do know there's lots of people who have success using other knives and stuff like that too.
Susan, you agree with that?
Absolutely. I don't think that grafting has to be an expensive hobby, and I do know people who use box cutters and stuff like that. You can do it on the cheap, but for me, when you're handling a knife, it has to be sharp.
Mm.
Sharp is safe, right? You'd think, "Oh, if it's dull, I can't hurt myself." Well, the sharp knife will keep you safe, and the right techniques will keep you safe. And I definitely would say invest in good quality grafting tape. You can make homemade grafting glue as well. And I have tried that, but I've noticed that the success of my grafts goes down. There's something about the tape that it secures so tightly, it
Mhm.
keeps the air out. And I think other than that, you're going to use your hand pruners and you need to make sure you can sanitize everything. So I have rubbing alcohol and a clean rag with me when I do this. Um, and, there's other bits and pieces you can get, but essentially a good knife, some grafting tape, and your plant material, and just have fun with it.
One other piece I would add is a label or some
Yes.
form of knowing what you've done, either taking
Amen.
pictures with your phone or whatever, because a Scion stick is a
Science.
stick is a stick. And it's so easy to get confused if you're not
Yep, yep, just
on it.
like the tomato seeds or
You
tomato
got it.
seeds going into the trays.
That is such a
Right.
good call. Steph would be very
Yeah.
proud of me. This time I had my silver labels when I did 3 trees because I knew that I'm not going to know which is which. So finally I did that. I am the worst at labeling things.
So common mistakes, I would say that we could play back everything that we've talked about, and you've basically said the things you should do. I would say the common mistakes are probably all the things opposite to the things you said you should do. But let's pick off some of the most common mistakes and just make sure that they are articulated.
I would start for me because, when Steph taught me, I was total beginner. And I wanted that to be the case because I knew the people reading the book and taking the course would be exactly like me, total beginners who want this thing, but just don't think they can do it. The most important thing Steph taught me was that frozen elbow cut, keeping me safe, keeping people around me safe, and making that smooth, beautifully smooth cut. Because at first, you're going to be hacking away at the branch, you could be hurting yourself. I would say that that is the most important thing to not do. That's the most common mistake. What about you, Steph? What do you think?
I would say people seem to wanna do things fast, especially this
Mm,
day and age.
mhm.
Um, and I think grafting, especially when you're starting to learn, you've gotta go slow and comfortable, go at your own pace and practice. And if you think keep practicing, I've done thousands and thousands of grafts at this point, but it starts way back with just the first one, and you've just gotta take practice material, do 20 cuts. If
Mhm.
you feel comfortable, then you can start on actually grafting. But like having yourself grounded and people will feel like they need to, like, especially in our courses and different times. Generally, when you cut yourself, it's when you're rushing, when you're going too fast, or if your cuts aren't lining up, you're not being calm and centered and focusing on what you're doing and thinking about all the steps. But if you just go slowly through it, take a breath before, make sure you've got space around you, be comfortable and be mindful of as you're going, then your success is gonna reflect that. And the more you practice, the better things will be, the better your cuts will
Mm,
inevitably be. Because the other thing that you really don't realize until you've done a lot of different types of grafting is how different angles as you're moving down the diameter of of even just a single stick of sign when it starts thick at one end and goes to thin, right?
yeah,
And so the angle of your blade just as you're moving through that, the it start when it's at the
yeah,
one end of the stick, you move through really easy. At the other end of the stick, it's like you chunk through it and it's different feeling and
right.
just having that experience and getting through that is so helpful. I find, I think that makes a big difference in people's graft take. And then sealing, having things sealed properly is a big part of it too. And then moisture on the roots after, making sure that, if you think about, even if you think about humans, you go through a big surgery in a hospital, you've got to get your nutrition after that. You got to make sure
Yeah.
you're drinking your fluids and have good inputs going into your body after that. Trees are the same, you do a big surgery to them. You need to make sure that it can recover nicely from the more you baby them and the better care you give them, the better they will do.
Well, that you make a good point because the Scion layers meeting up is where the water and the nutrients are flowing. That's the transport line. That's the direct line. And
Mhm.
so using the hospital analogy, it's like making sure you have that IV hooked up to your arm the whole time because that's what's going to keep you going.
Yeah. Yep, for sure. Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Wow. Okay. So one maybe okay. So I have one more question, and then I wanna learn, where do we go for more information? Because 'Cause you've already got me ready to sign up. But before we do that, tell me about the role that grafting can play in preserving some maybe endangered or heirloom or rare fruit varieties. Is that a very important way to do that?
Yeah, definitely. yeah, I mean, that's ultimately the only way to do it for a lot of different. I mean, you can try and root an apple cutting, but that's really difficult. Grafting is way easier.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's definitely a big part of it. And that's a big part of our test orchards too. And having all the different varieties that we have there. It's, to be perfectly honest, it's not like we do it for the money. It really is a passion project to have all these old amazing varieties. And the more you get to know the trees and the types of, like, the fruit, it's over the years I've gotten seasonally to know each different cultivar and how it behaves, and the harvest window is this long. And there's so many different nuances between the varieties. I know people from the outside, that people who aren't uh, fruit tree nerds so much as me, you see an apple and it's red. But to me, I see an apple and, like, the everything from the lentils to the crunch of it, the storage,
Yep.
the how fast it
Yep.
browns. There's so many different aspects to what each cultivar is and what makes it itself. And then the fascinating bit to me in the recent years has been that I've been kind of wrapping my head around, is sort of that epigenetic piece of
Yes.
how it can behave a little bit differently in a more northern or more southern climate, or different constraints that way. Yeah, I think preserving these different varieties is so important, and it's important, and it's just fascinating too.
Mm.
The history and all that goes along with it.
One of my students sent me an article in the Denver Post maybe a year or two ago about the rediscovery of the Colorado orange apple. Did you ever hear that
Mm.
story?
No, I haven't.
Some super cool, geeky people that were avid apple growers and lovers got wind of the story, but they were into preserving these heritage varieties that were either lost or thought to be gone or extinct. And, there's thousands of varieties that have been bred over time, but so few
Mhm,
remain. But the
mhm.
hunt to find rootstock or, a piece of a living species that was thought to be extinct. Anyway, they heard of this one variety that was super famous and it commanded high dollars for sale because it was so unique in its flavor and its storability and its texture and all of those things that you want. And it was thought to be extinct. And then they came across word that maybe there was a tree that was still living or part of it or whatever. And so they went on the hunt and they finally found it. And they took cuttings and they grafted. And so
Mhm.
the whole podcast episode was their story. And I didn't know. I mean, it sounded very cool to me, which is why I wanted to do the episode. But then to hear the story, it makes you really want to immerse yourself in the same thing. You want to do it too. And now you guys have come and done it again. So this is
Oh yeah.
awesome. I'm gonna really do this. And like I needed one more thing on my plate to do, but sounds super fun. So where would people go? And of course, this book, Fruit Tree Grafting for Everyone: A DIY Guide to Creating Your Own Fruit Trees, by the two of you is great. I've had a chance to peruse it thoroughly, and it's very thorough. And then you have the course on top of that. Tell me how the course, as a course creator, I know how the course differs from the book, but tell us about the course that you all created.
So the course, you can find it at learn.orchardpeople.com. And it was a very amazing experience for me, I think for both of us, because I basically it was my journey with Steph teaching me how to graft and me watching her do the different types of grafting. We captured everything in video. And I had all the beginner's questions. There was no, like, it wasn't like an advanced person talking about it and forgetting to ask the questions. I knew the questions because I was asking all of them. The most
Perfect.
important thing for me was to understand the science. So we have a whole section all about the science of grafting to help make it intuitive. And then we go through 5 different techniques and teach you how to do that. The fun part of the course is, of course, also that we expect your participation.
Hmm.
So, in each section, you have homework to do, and we expect to see photos of your experiment.
Wow.
And we also have the grafting grotto. So, people who buy the course now, even next year, they can go online and say, okay, this is what happened to my grafts. And Steph or I will get back to you and say, wow, that looks good. And this is how you could change it and things like that. So it's very much a community and it takes you through step by step.
And that's one of the unique things about a course that you can update it or people have access to you versus the book, as good as it is, it's static. Is what it is when it was written, and then things change or new information comes around. So kudos to you for doing that course. Um, look for a new student by the name of Joe Lample in the near future.
That would be so fun, Joe. I would love to have you as a student. That would be great.
Be on the lookout for that. This was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. Learned a lot. Certainly, I don't know that this, in no surprise here, I'm not sure that we're equipped yet to go out and graft from this conversation, but I think it whets our appetite to want to learn more, to want to read the book, to want to maybe take the course, and then actually get out there and do it. And again, I raise my hand to that. So thank you both so much, Steph and Susan, for this great conversation. And I just enjoy every time we have a chance to get together. And Steph, I hope we get to pick up the conversation again as well. So thank you both
That would be
very
wonderful.
much. Yeah,
Thank you so much, Joe.
Thanks
This has
so
been so
much.
much fun.
Yeah, thank you very much. Been a pleasure.
likewise.